everybody. Welcome back. Our study, Rescued from Death, in the life of the Apostle Paul. And so here I am, Jeff Hopper with Jeffrey Cranford.
Yeah, good to be with you.
And we're talking about the Apostle Paul. We've looked at some ways that Paul has begun to grow, and we're going to look at some of the help that he got along the way today.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, help along the way with your golf game. Did you get any, or were you one of those all on my own sort of guys?
Yeah, you know, I certainly can never say I never got any help, but relative to the guys today, I mean, often you'll hear maybe Jordan Spieth or other guys say, well, my team today, and he'll give credit to the team, constantly talking about the team. And some of the old guys, they just can't even relate to that at all. I recently was interviewing Frank Beard, 11-time PGA Tour winner, and he said, what kind of help did you get? What was your team like? He goes, well, I had a caddy that had one shoe. And so, there's really been an evolution of this team mentality. And I didn't have a team. I mean, I didn't have early lessons. I didn't really take a lesson until I had already played NCAA Division I golf for 4 years, never had certainly an official lesson. I had some guys that kind of, walk by and say, hey, son, why don't you do this? But certainly along the way, I remember particularly in college, I had one, it was actually an assistant coach that came on with the team, and he'd played a little of the mini tours, and I'll never forget as long as I live that I said, well, how do you go low? Really going low, and we actually wrote an article on this, and he said something so simple, but at the time it had profound picture in my mind. He said, if you're 2 under, you have one goal, and that's to get to 3 under. If you're 3 under, you have one goal, that's to get to 4 under. Well, you would think, but encapsulated within that was kind of a feeling of, it keeps you in the moment. You're not thinking 4 holes ahead, you're thinking about the next hole. There's a place to be conservative, but you're always and it also gets you out of a comfort zone. And I think I took that to heart so much. Sometimes I made a few mistakes maybe by being a little aggressive, but hey, it's worked for Phil Mickelson too. He's accused a lot of not being aggressive enough, but had he laid back and not been as aggressive as he was, more conservative, he might have won 10 events and we wouldn't, know the 40 some odd wins Phil Mickelson.
Yeah,
so it's things like that have helped me along the way.
Well, what about as a PGA professional? There's a whole apprenticing thing built into that program. You must have had some help in how do I relate to my customers? How do I relate to those that I'm teaching?
A lot more intense today. Back at my age today, even going through the PGA of America programs, it was you went to 2 little business schools in the old days, and how many green shirts, things like that. Today it's a lot more comprehensive, and I think the PGA of America is giving a lot more emphasis on training, not only golf swing and shot, but actually all the way into the kind of what it is to manage a club and things like that. So yeah, a lot more apprenticeship goes on today than it was when I was coming up.
Interesting. Well, in Paul's life, from day one, he had help. And day one was that day on the road to Damascus.
That's right.
And while he was being just knocked out, really, by Jesus, there was a guy who was getting a word from the Lord named Ananias, who was then commissioned to wait for Paul and assist him in this sudden conversion.
That's exactly right.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, what fascinates me about Ananias is he was a reluctant discipler. He was a reluctant participant. He naturally feared. They'd heard all the word about this guy, Saul of Tarsus, who was coming and rounding him up. And you can imagine his fear of wanting to even engage with this guy, even be known. He was one of the guys Paul was coming to get. Imagine.
Right. Yeah.
So, when I think about Ananias, the thing that stands out in my head is his fearlessness. And once he knew it was the Lord, once he knew that he had a calling, he stepped right into that calling. Not too different than what we'll see from Saul become Paul. Once he met Jesus on the road, he gave his whole life, and he said often he was shipwrecked, he was stoned, he was thrown outside the city, he was ridiculed, he lost all his friends, he lost that whole community that he was part of, and that willingness to do it. But it did not come without community and partnership. And we'll see, Barnabas and Ananias and many others that would come alongside Paul in his journey. An extraordinary guy.
Yeah, well, let's talk about another. Paul always seemed to be traveling with this band of people.
Yeah.
But there was one person who was consistently there. That was the chronicler of what was happening, and that was this Dr. Luke. Tell me a little bit about this guy and his engagement with Paul.
Yeah, we don't know as much. There's debate on whether or not he was even Jewish. He might have been the only Gentile writer of the New Testament. That's debatable. Scholars disagree on that. But here's a guy, like Barnabas was a business guy, and he got caught up in this advancement of the kingdom and partnered with Paul. And then Luke, obviously, he was a doctor, and it turned out to be an incredible historian, too. So when you see these guys that kind of come out of, well, they're not, we think have this layman laity, and I didn't go to seminary, or I didn't do. No, these were just normal guys that got caught up in the wind of the Spirit and ended up finding themselves partnered with one of the most prolific New Testament writer. I mean, can you imagine the effect that Paul has had on for 2,000 years of church history?
Right.
And these guys got to be part of that, and it was just awesome.
Well, and there were women too.
Yeah, I have no question about it.
Right,
no
we'll talk
about
about a couple of those, but for now, let's talk about Lydia, who was one of these people who really practically helped Paul and some of the others that were doing ministry.
Lydia was simply the first European convert. She was just down by the river, which also brings up a point, I mean, we talk about going out to the golf course. No, you've got to have a big event. You've got to have, a big speaker come in. Or you got no. Paul simply, led by the Spirit, went down by the river because that's where people were. And here's a woman, and it said that God had given her some faith, and she had faith enough to believe. And then she was a participant in that early, even Paul kind of fitting in there, and she was a partner in the gospel. Just amazing.
Yeah, so fantastic. I think one of the things that we need to be doing is looking for those who can continue to help us no matter where we are. We have a good friend that's been around the ministry for a long time who really looks for, even though he's now, in his later 60s, approaching 70, looking for guys who are 80 years old.
That's right.
Because I want to have that influence.
That's
I want to keep having people who've been through it before.
You can't do it alone. And there are people out there that God has sovereignly already prepared for you to walk with, and they can't do it without you. And that's a deep lesson for all of us to learn.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all. We'll see you next time.